In 1973, Sears, Roebuck and Company completed construction of the tallest building in the world. The Sears Tower rose over Chicago as a physical statement of scale and permanence. At the time, Sears was the largest retailer in the United States, with annual revenues exceeding $10 billion and a presence in nearly every American suburb. Its catalog reached millions of homes. Its department stores anchored shopping malls across the country. For much of the 20th century, Sears was not simply a retailer. It was infrastructure. 4 decades later, the company no longer occupied that role, and the tower no longer carried its name. Sears' position appeared unusually stable because it had been built slowly, deliberately, and across multiple economic eras. Founded in the late 19th century as a mail-order business, the company grew alongside the expansion of railroads, rural free delivery, and middle-class consumer demand. The catalog was not a marketing accessory, it was the business. Customers trusted Sears to deliver tools, clothing, appliances, and even houses to places where local retail options were limited or non-existent. That trust compounded over generations. As the United States suburbanized after World War II, Sears adapted. It moved from mail order to physical retail, placing large department stores at the center of newly built shopping malls. These stores sold a broad but carefully curated assortment: appliances under the Kenmore brand, tools under Craftsman, clothing under private labels, and household goods that emphasized durability rather than fashion. Sears did not compete primarily on novelty or price. It competed on reliability and scale. Internally, the company viewed itself as disciplined and data-driven. It invested heavily in logistics, inventory management, and supplier relationships. For decades, it was considered one of the best-managed companies in America. Its executives believed that diversification reduced risk. Over time, Sears expanded into insurance through Allstate, into financial services through Dean Witter, and into real estate development. These businesses were not side projects. They were material contributors to earnings, and reinforced the idea that Sears was less a retailer than a broadly diversified consumer institution. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, however, the retail environment was beginning to change in ways that were difficult to reconcile with Sears' structure. Discount retailers such as Walmart and Target were expanding aggressively, offering narrower assortments at lower prices. Specialty retailers were emerging as well, focusing on single categories: electronics, apparel, home improvement, with deeper selection and clearer brand positioning. Shopping malls themselves were becoming more competitive, with higher rents and faster turnover. Sears recognized some of these shifts, but its responses were constrained by what it already was. Its stores were large, expensive to operate, and optimized for a broad middle-market customer. Reducing assortment risked undermining the one-stop-shop identity. Competing on price would compress margins across a vast footprint. Competing on fashion or experience required capabilities the company had never prioritized. In the early 1990s, leadership began to retreat from diversification. Dean Witter was spun off. Allstate followed. The logic was that Sears needed to refocus on retail, but the divestitures also removed stable, high-margin businesses that had cushioned retail volatility. What remained was a department store chain facing intensifying competition with fewer internal offsets. At the same time, the mall-centric model was weakening. Foot traffic became less predictable. Consumers began to fragment by income and preference. Walmart captured value-oriented shoppers. Specialty chains captured category-focused ones. Sears increasingly occupied an uncomfortable middle. Its prices were often higher than discounters, while its stores felt less focused than specialists. By the late 1990s, early signs of deterioration were visible. Same-store sales stagnated. Store conditions varied widely. Some locations remained profitable, while others declined quietly. Capital expenditures were increasingly defensive, focused on maintaining existing stores rather than reimagining them. Sears still generated significant revenue, but growth was no longer assumed. The emergence of e-commerce introduced a more structural challenge. Amazon, founded in 1994, initially posed little direct threat to a department store selling appliances and apparel, but the internet altered consumer expectations around selection, convenience, and price transparency. Sears did invest in online retail, leveraging its catalog heritage, but the effort remained secondary to the physical store base. The organization was not structured to prioritize a channel that, at the time, generated lower margins and uncertain returns. In 2004, Sears merged with Kmart, another legacy retailer that had already entered decline. The deal was engineered by hedge fund manager Edward Lampert, who believed that the combined company's real estate and brands were undervalued. On paper, the merger created scale. It also created complexity. Two struggling retailers with different cultures, systems, and customer bases were placed under a single holding structure. Management philosophy shifted after the merger. The combined company, Sears Holdings, was run with an emphasis on financial metrics, internal capital allocation, and cost discipline. Business units competed internally for resources. This approach was intended to drive efficiency and accountability. In practice, it often slowed decision-making and discouraged long-term investment in stores and employees. Store conditions continued to erode. Maintenance was deferred. Staffing levels declined. Customer experience became inconsistent. While competitors invested in supply chain modernization, store refreshes, and omnichannel integration, Sears focused on preserving liquidity and extracting value from assets. Brands such as Craftsman and Kenmore remained well known, but their association with deteriorating stores weakened their appeal. The housing crisis of 2008 accelerated existing pressures. Consumer spending contracted sharply, particularly in categories like appliances and home goods. Sears' sales fell and losses mounted. The company responded by closing underperforming stores and selling assets. Real estate was monetized through spin-offs and sale-leaseback transactions. Each move provided temporary relief but reduced future flexibility. As years passed, the cycle repeated. Declining sales reduced cash flow. Reduced cash flow limited investment. Limited investment further weakened competitiveness. Vendor relationships became strained. Credit terms tightened. Inventory selection narrowed. Shoppers noticed the changes and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Attempts to pivot continued. Sears explored smaller store formats, loyalty programs, and online initiatives. None were scaled aggressively enough to reverse the trajectory. The organization was large, fragmented, and operating under constant financial pressure. Decisions that might have required years of upfront investment were difficult to justify quarter by quarter. By the mid-2010s, the company's footprint had shrunk substantially. Hundreds of stores closed. Iconic locations went dark. Employees faced uncertainty. The brands that had once defined Sears were sold off individually. Craftsman was sold to Stanley Black & Decker. Die Hard followed. Kenmore remained, but with diminished distribution. In October 2018, Sears Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing listed billions of dollars in liabilities and marked the formal end of Sears as a dominant national retailer. Some stores continued operating during restructuring. A smaller entity eventually emerged, retaining a limited number of locations and rights to the name. The scale, however, was no longer comparable to what had existed before. The collapse did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded over decades through accumulation rather than shock. Each decision was defensible in isolation. Together, they narrowed the company's options until few remained. Sears did not fail because it ignored its past. It failed because its past defined structures that became difficult to unwind. For much of the 20th century, Sears had been how Americans accessed modern life. It sold the appliances that entered kitchens, the tools that built garages, the clothes worn to school and work. Its catalog sat on coffee tables. Its stores marked weekends. That role depended on assumptions about scale, trust, and physical presence that held for a long time. When those assumptions shifted, the institution persisted longer than the environment that supported it. By the time the adjustment became unavoidable, the cost of change exceeded the company's capacity to absorb it. Sears did not disappear suddenly. It receded, store by store, category by category, until what remained was a name with little of the system behind it. The Sears Tower still stands in Chicago, now under a different name. It remains a reminder of the scale the company once achieved. Sears itself became something else, a case of how durable institutions can outlast their relevance, and how the mechanisms that once made them resilient can, over time, make them rigid.